In the winter shadows of 1944, as the European continent trembled beneath the weight of the Second World War, a peculiar kind of American unit crossed the Atlantic. They did not march with the proud thunder of infantry, nor did they arrive with the imposing silhouette of armored divisions. Instead, they stepped onto foreign soil carrying paintbrushes, sound equipment, inflatable rubber, amplifiers, and the kind of imagination that seemed absurdly out of place amid the brutal arithmetic of war. They were artists, designers, actors, sound engineers, architects, radio specialists, men who, in peacetime, would create advertisements, sculpt metal, design fashion, sketch portraits, or orchestrate stage plays. And yet here, in Europe's most violent era, the United States Army had given them a mission unlike any other in military history. Use deception to save lives. Use imagination as a weapon. Use illusion to fight a war. This strange and secretive unit would come to be known as the Ghost Army, officially the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops. Their legend would remain classified for decades, but those who served understood, even then, that they were part of something unprecedented, a unit that specialized in tactical deception on a scale never attempted before, a group that would maneuver across Normandy, France, Belgium, Luxembourg, and Germany, staging more than 20 large-scale deception operations against the Wehrmacht. And in each one they stood in the path of some of the most battle-hardened German divisions, not with firepower, but with illusion. To understand how such a unit came to exist, one must return to the earlier years of the war, when the Allies were confronted with a harsh reality. German intelligence, signals intercept units, and reconnaissance forces were exceptionally skilled. Against an enemy like that, traditional camouflage was no longer enough. The British had demonstrated during the North African campaign, with the legendary Operation Bertram before the Battle of El Alamein, that deception could alter the battlefield just as much as artillery or armor. Inflatable tanks, dummy supply depots, fake pipelines, and misleading radio chatter had helped Montgomery outmaneuver Rommel. The Americans noticed. They saw what deception could achieve when it was meticulous, convincing, and daring. Thus, in early 1944, the U.S. Army formed a deception unit modeled after these British successes. From Fort Meade to Camp Forest to the quiet classrooms of art schools and drafting studios, the Army gathered men whose talents did not match traditional soldiering, but perfectly suited the needs of deception warfare. Among them were soldiers like Bill Blass, who would one day become a famous fashion designer, Ellsworth Kelly, who would later shape modern American art, and Arthur Singer, who would become renowned for wildlife illustration. They were joined by radio experts, sound technicians from Bell Labs, engineers, and veterans of Hollywood special effects teams, and together, under the command of officers who understood both creativity and military discipline, they became the Ghost Army. Their mission was simple in concept, but complex in execution. Move in small teams across the front, impersonate entire divisions, confuse the German high command, fake large troop movements, and draw enemy attention away from real Allied units. To accomplish this, they developed a 4-part deception toolkit that would become the backbone of their operations. First were the visual illusions, the inflatable tanks, trucks, artillery pieces, and aircraft. Crafted from rubberized fabric and designed with remarkable attention to detail, these 30-foot Sherman tanks and 8-ton howitzers could be assembled in minutes. From a distance, or from the vantage point of Luftwaffe reconnaissance aircraft, they looked convincingly real. The Ghost Army could deploy a battalion of these fake armored vehicles in a single night, shaping an entire battlefield with air-filled firepower.
Second were the sonic deceptions. Using enormous speakers mounted on half-tracks, the unit played recordings of armored divisions moving, bridging rivers, idling engines, or driving on gravel roads. These sounds had been meticulously recorded stateside using real tanks and vehicles. Through careful mixing, engineers could simulate hundreds of vehicles moving in formations that did not exist. At night, in forests or fog-covered plains, German patrols often heard what they believed was an entire armored column preparing for attack. Third was radio deception, perhaps the most subtle and dangerous part of their operations. Skilled radio operators would impersonate the communications traffic of entire divisions. They replicated the patterns, slang, timing, and even individual quirks of radio operators from units like the 2nd Armored Division or the 6th Infantry Division. The Germans, who monitored Allied frequencies obsessively, believed these impersonations. They charted movements on their maps, adjusting deployments accordingly, only to discover later that no such divisions were present. And finally, there was the art of atmosphere. The Ghost Army used fake convoy markings, bogus road signs, counterfeit unit patches sewn onto uniforms, and phony camps populated with actors posing as officers. They walked around town staging casual conversations in cafes, allowing locals, many of whom were informants, to overhear the arrival of a fictional division. This practice, called special effects, was an art form of its own, part theater, part espionage. The first major test of the Ghost Army came after the Normandy breakout in June 1944. As Patton's Third Army began its rapid push across France, the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops were tasked with protecting the flanks of advancing units, shielding supply lines, and drawing German forces away from strategic bridges. Their early operations were small, but they learned quickly that German reconnaissance was aggressive, persistent, and highly analytical. Every inflatable tank, every fake column of trucks, every deceptive radio transmission had to be placed precisely. But it was in Operation Brest, in August 1944, that the Ghost Army demonstrated their capability in full. Patton needed to focus his real armored divisions eastward, yet the Germans defending the port city of Brest were still formidable. The Ghost Army moved in, deploying inflatable Sherman tanks across fields, simulating the arrival of the 6th Armored Division. Their sonic trucks played tracks of armored battalions digging in, engines roaring, and half-tracks maneuvering. Their radio operators filled the airwaves with bogus messages. For days, German forces remained pinned, expecting a major assault that never came. Meanwhile, real American units encircled the city from another direction. This deception saved thousands of Allied lives. Then came the Battle of the Bulge, when the Ghost Army's skills were needed more desperately than ever. In December 1944, German forces launched a massive surprise offensive through the Ardennes, cutting into the Allied front and throwing units into chaos. The Ghost Army was scattered, but quickly redeployed to plug gaps in the line with illusions. They created fake defensive positions, pretended to reinforce sectors with non-existent divisions, and misled German intelligence about American counter-offensive movements. In one instance, they simulated the presence of the 75th Infantry Division in a vulnerable sector, convincing the Germans to hold back forces that might otherwise have exploited a break. Yet their most daring and consequential operation was still ahead.
In March 1945, as the Allies approached the Rhine, the U.S. Ninth Army planned a major river crossing at Wesel. Success required misdirection on a grand scale. The Germans had to believe the crossing would occur miles north of its actual location. The Ghost Army was brought in under strict secrecy. What followed would become perhaps the most successful battlefield deception conducted by American forces in the entire war. The 23rd deployed hundreds of inflatable tanks and artillery pieces along a stretch of the Rhine opposite a heavily defended sector. At night, sonic trucks played the sounds of pontoon bridges being constructed and boats being launched. Radio teams mimicked the communications of engineer battalions preparing for a crossing. Fake supply dumps and command posts were erected, complete with phony sentries and deliberately visible officers. Patrols roamed the area carrying maps and documents with doctored plans, knowing German scouts might observe them. The Germans responded exactly as intended. They reinforced the wrong sector, believing the Americans would attempt a crossing there. Meanwhile, real Allied forces crossed the Rhine to the south, facing far less resistance than expected. The deception helped secure a foothold during one of the most critical phases of the war. For the Ghost Army, the success at the Rhine was a validation of everything they had trained for, the ability to alter enemy decision-making on a strategic level without firing a shot. Throughout these operations, the Ghost Army lived in constant danger. Though their mission relied on illusion, the bullets aimed at them were real. German scouts and artillery often targeted the fake tanks or supposed command posts, unaware that the armor was air-filled rubber. There were instances where inflatable vehicles were shredded by machine gun fire, or where sound trucks narrowly escaped shelling. The men understood the stakes. If captured, they would almost certainly be executed. The Geneva Convention offered no protections for deception units operating near the front lines. Despite their unorthodox purpose, the Ghost Army developed extraordinary courage under fire. They traveled lightly, usually without the heavy weapons needed to defend themselves in a real fight. They often operated forward of the main Allied lines, impersonating divisions that were supposedly preparing for attack. The Germans, believing these positions to be valuable targets, shelled them heavily. Yet the men of the Ghost Army remained at their posts, maintaining the illusion even as artillery fell around them. They also forged a unique camaraderie born from their shared artistry. In downtime, they sketched war-torn landscapes, painted portraits of fellow soldiers, or designed humorous posters. Their camp studios overflowed with wartime artwork, caricatures, landscapes, surrealist pieces blending tanks and trees, drawings of destroyed towns, and sketches of locals. Many of these works, lost or hidden for decades, would later resurface in museums and documentaries. The 23rd Headquarters Special Troops concluded their final major deception operation near the end of the war, helping conceal the movements of the 9th Army as it advanced into Germany. When victory in Europe was declared in May 1945, the Ghost Army's role remained one of the war's most closely guarded secrets. Their very existence was classified. Their soldiers returned home quietly, receiving no public recognition. Some resumed their artistic careers. Others carried their wartime experiences into fields like architecture, industrial design, and fine art. For decades, they said nothing about what they had done. It was not until the 1990s that the Ghost Army story began to emerge from the shadows. Historians uncovered documents, veterans stepped forward to share their accounts, and archival footage was declassified. What emerged was a story that redefined the boundaries of warfare, an account of how imagination, creativity, and psychological manipulation had been weaponized to save lives on a massive scale. Military analysts would later estimate that the Ghost Army's operations saved between 15,000 and 30,000 Allied lives. Their deceptions diverted enemy divisions, reduced pressure on advancing units, and prevented German reinforcements from reaching critical battlefields. The unit's success helped shape post-war military doctrine, influencing modern psychological operations and deception strategies. Yet the men themselves remained humble, often emphasizing that their ultimate goal had always been to bring American soldiers home alive. In hindsight, it is clear that the Ghost Army's work demanded more than artistry.
They required nerves of steel, technical sophistication, creativity under pressure, and a deep understanding of enemy psychology. They had to think like the Wehrmacht, anticipate reconnaissance movements, and craft illusions convincing enough to withstand scrutiny from trained intelligence officers. Every detail, from the spacing of tracks in the mud to the way laundry hung on clotheslines, had to mimic the behavior of real divisions. Perhaps the most extraordinary element of their story is the contrast between the brutality of war and the whimsical nature of their tools. Rubber tanks, wooden cannons, phantom radio transmissions, soundscapes of invisible armies. These were instruments of deception, but also symbols of a different kind of courage. The courage to fight not by killing, but by confusing, distracting, and misdirecting an enemy who showed no mercy. In the final months of the war, as the Allies closed in on Berlin, the Ghost Army's work quietly faded into the background. Conventional military strength would finish the job. But the unit's impact had already been written into the fabric of the European campaign. Every bridge captured with reduced casualties, every town spared a prolonged assault, every real division allowed to maneuver unimpeded. These achievements bore the invisible signature of the Ghost Army. In the decades that followed, the veterans aged, their stories slowly coming to light as historians recognized the significance of their contribution. When the unit was finally honored by the U.S. Congress, many members had already passed away. But their legacy endures, not just in museums and official citations, but in the cultural memory of a war where creativity became a weapon and illusion a shield. Today, the Ghost Army stands as one of the most unusual and remarkable units in military history, a testament to the idea that innovation can change the course of battle, that deception can save lives, and that sometimes the most powerful tools in war are not guns or tanks, but imagination and courage. And so their story continues to inspire. A secret army of artists who stepped onto the world's deadliest battlefield, armed not with firepower, but with ideas. Ideas that helped bring an end to the most catastrophic conflict in human history.